this episode, we will embark on a journey into the primitive brain.
So when we think about the brain, we usually think of the largest part of the brain. And that brain is about the size of two fists together. And that part of the brain is responsible for all the higher functions of the brain. Those things that we would refer to as thinking, reasoning, problem solving, also language and movement, but also all the sensory aspects of the brain. And those functions are the functions that is regulated by the brain itself. In other words, if I want to make a decision, it's that part of the brain that makes a decision. So it's voluntary from that point of view. That part of the brain is the brain that's also the learning part of the brain. And since that is the case, it is also the part of the brain that actually concentrates on the volition. In other words, the volition is situated in that part of the brain. The other part of the brain is the primitive brain. And that part of the brain has the function of self-preservation, in other words, to preserve ourselves and also to keep us safe. And that's a very interesting part of the brain. And that part of the brain basically never stops functioning. And it functions on its own, and therefore it regulates all the regulatory aspects of the human being. In other words, things like breathing, things like the heartbeat, etc. And basically, that part of the brain is always in control. So much so that it sometimes also paralyzes the higher brain, or the big brain, or the larger brain, to function well. It wants to keep everything at its status quo, in other words, keeping functioning at the status that it is. And for that functioning to really happen, that part of the brain creates three things. Number one, it creates a freezing if there is change at hand, or a fight, or a flight action. And it's also very closely related to another part of the brain that actually controls our emotions. And if something, therefore, seems to be unsafe to us, fear steps in, and that brain creates the emotion of fear. And therefore, we don't easily change. The brain keeps us safe, but it's also that part of the brain that prevents us from higher learning and from learning well, and keeps us in the mode where we are. The primitive brain will just confirm the safeness and keep the human being in the state that it is. And to look at the very interesting thing of the primitive brain, also called the reptilian brain, let's look at what Vivian discovered when she went to a snake park.
Isn't it ironic that your reptilian brain cringes at the sight of a reptile?
So today I'm teaching you about the primitive brain. It's the lower brain. It is also called the reptilian brain. And I've got a very special guest with me. His name is Nick Evans. Hi.
Thank you.
So you're making a living out of these little creatures and catching these creatures. So are you scared of snakes?
If I'm walking and I see a snake, no. Sometimes when rescuing them, the situation can be dangerous.
Yeah.
Being up in a roof with a black mamba, or being up in a tree with a mamba, those situations can be scary because you can fall.
Just move, stay back. Wait, can you see the head? Just watch from there. I've got the head, I've got him. Oh. He's huge, eh?
How do you feel about a snake? I guess you're scared. I guess it creates fear. Maybe somebody has told you to be fearful. Now, the primitive brain or the reptilian brain deals with self-preservation. It protects us from danger. It protects us from dying, basically. That's what it's all about. It is the component of your brain that when you are in danger and you see or you sense through your senses that, oh, this is making me not to be safe, then it's going to turn you into this action that's going to make you to either fight it or you're going to flight it. You're going to want to kill this thing or you're going to run away. Or it's going to give you such a fright that you're going to freeze and you're going to not move because your body is going to secrete adrenaline. And the more stress or the more anxieties you have, the more your body is going to actually secrete cortisol. So the primitive brain is the self-preservation part of our body, and it deals with impulses and compulsions. That's why it's only one-dimensional, and the impulse compulsive disorders and all the anxiety disorders is originating from your primitive brain. It's actually a very dumb component of your brain, but it's a very important component because it deals with your breathing. So the first thing you must know that when you get a fright, then you're going to stop breathing and your breathing is going to diminish, and then you must actually breathe. So I want you to breathe after me. A, inhale, to B, and exhale, and A, to be. So when you get a fright and your primitive brain, this lower part of your brain is activated, then you must know this component deals with breathing, and you've got to inhale and exhale a lot so that you can neutralize it again. You can actually get it back to its status quo, its natural position. The second thing about the primitive brain, it deals with heat regulation. So you'll find when you're scared or when you're embarrassed or you're shy or you get a fright, then your heat in your body is actually getting affected. You'll get flushes on your skin and body. You'll feel that there's a change in the heat. So that is what the primitive brain does. It's got other functions as well, but it deals with self-preservation.
So what does it look like when someone's functioning in their primitive brain? And how does their anxiety infect others around them?
What's going on here? The guests are going to be here in less than half an hour. Nothing's clean, nothing's tidy, the place is a mess.
Don't blame us. You're the one who slept late this morning.
It's because you never do what you're supposed to do. And John, you're sitting playing on your phone. Weren't you supposed to mop and tidy the chairs, clean the chairs? And then you're even too useless to speak to me. What's going on with you guys? What's wrong with you?
No, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Come, John, let's get out of here. Come.
Are you happy now? I suppose your dad's going to also now leave me because I don't love him enough because the party's a mess.
No one can love you when you're like this.
Well, why don't you just also leave? I suppose you also don't love me anymore.
Fine. I'm leaving. Fine. See you never. Bye.
Bye. These white people, they always make such a big deal out of nothing.
Yes, they battle us because of we are black. Let's go to the bar.
What's going on here?
The mom is stressed out. Can you see? She didn't sleep in the night. She was thinking, what if I don't pull it off? Then I'm not going to be okay. The mother's anxiety is now transferring into the whole space, the whole environment. The daughter is now taking up the anxiety, and she's now going into a defensive mode.
Don't blame us. You're the one who slept late this morning.
It's because you never do what you're supposed to do.
The mother is now getting worse in her anxiety. She's now becoming personal. The daughter's anxiety is now transferring back to her, and now it's an exacerbated version of anxiety, and now she's becoming personal. That's not nice.
And then you give it to useless to speak to me. What's going on with you guys?
John is now going into freeze mode. He's having such high anxiety that he cannot respond at all. He's non-responsive. He's in freeze mode.
And then you even too useless to speak to me. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, the mother is now breaking him down as well. She's telling him he's not okay. In other words, she's breaking his sense of self, his self-esteem. That is what she's breaking down. John is getting a headache. His biological functions are now affected by the anxiety of the mother. Now the daughter's bad attitude is coming out. She's developing a bigger bad attitude hardwire in her brain. Can you see how she rolled her eyes? Let's look at Abram. He is huffing and puffing and brewing. Anger is building up in him. You can see that.
No, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?
And who is flighting? Abram is flighting. That's what we call avoidance behavior. He just cannot handle that conflict. He's running away.
Are you happy now? I suppose your dad's going to also now leave me.
Can you believe it? The mother is now in a victim state. Can you see the victim hardwire? She's now feeling sorry for herself. She's now thinking her husband is going to leave her. Can you believe that?
Because I don't love him enough because the party's a mess.
No one can love you when you're like this.
But why don't you just also leave?
Between the mother and the daughter, they are losing love for each other. They're insulting each other so ugly. They are losing love for each other.
See you never.
The situation is now getting out of hand because Abram is now misinterpreting the threat as racism.
These white people, they always make such a big deal out of nothing.
In the meantime, it is only anxiety of the mother because of the party, but he's now putting it into a box and framing it as racism.
Such a big deal out of nothing.
The mother's anxiety is igniting addictive patterns in others.
Let's go to the bar and drink.
Can you see that anxiety creates damage in its wake? It creates a multiplier effect. You don't even know where it's going to end when one human starts with that anxiety response and how it just permeates and grows and disempowers human beings.
We may not always realize how the anxieties that lie within our primitive brain can cause a snowball effect, triggering the primitive brain in others.
If you hold there and people are stressed like that, they're actually holding onto their lower brain and onto their primitive brain. So that component is your one-dimensional intelligence. It deals with just up, down, impulse, compulsion. It is your fear machine. It's your self-preservation component. It deals with fight and flight and freeze and fright and all the so that is how you're going to learn it. It's the side of the brain. So it deals with impulsions and compulsiveness. In other words, it will then also deal with addictions, addictive type of patterns. I need satisfaction. It is your carnal self. It deals with food. So anything that you take in by your mouth, like cigarettes and drink and that need for something. I have to have that addictive patterns of stuff. Also any addictive pattern like, let's say, gambling, or let's say pornography or social media. I have to check that next Facebook call. What is this? What is it? And it's usually nonsense, but you can't help yourself. I must. That's what that part of the brain does. But so it is not very intelligent. It is actually just your self-preservation mechanism, but it's your self-preservation. In other words, it's your ego. Freud was talking about the id. So it is yourself, so it's your ego. So a person who has got an overstimulated primitive brain, lower brain, will be in this self-centered, egocentric type of behavioral patterns. And we call it nowadays narcissism. It's got to do with myself, what I can get, me, myself, and I. What can you give me? Why didn't you give me? Why didn't you recognize me? So all of those type of patterns is derived from that lower brain. That is just that one-dimensional impulse compulsiveness. So that is your f. You'll also find that fornication and flirtation is also the lusty things. So that is your primitive stuff. Your primitive, give me attention. Well, that's why people flirt after all, isn't it? They need a bit attention on self. So all of that is coming through that primitive side of your brain.
Humans who function inside their primitive brain will always be held back by their own fears, prohibiting them from learning or growing.